Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's my pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you for being here. I was very excited when we got in touch, and you have a masterful career in media storytelling. You are actually yourself a master storyteller. 25 years of experience. You won an Emmy Award in 2006 for the docuseries After the War, Before the Peace, and in 2010 a Peabody Award for Who Killed Doc. Now, what makes a great story? How do we become better storytellers?
Sure, well, let's just talk about those two stories. And I've been fortunate in my career to win a dozen Emmys and many, many awards, but you just mentioned two that I'm very, very proud of. And so in 2006, the series that won for After the War, Before the Peace, that was when I embedded with U.S. troops in Iraq for the first democratic elections, which were in 2005. And that was quite the experience, seeing what had happened after the U.S. invasion under President George W. Bush, and then seeing the democratic elections. And so that was for that series. And, you can report facts all day long, but as you just mentioned, it's about storytelling. And so we made sure in that story, when we were embedded with those troops over in Iraq, that we told their stories. And same with the Peabody Award-winning series Who Killed Doc. In the most simple form, it was about the death of a Minnesota sailor, Dave Cedergren. And he was found, his body was found in the showers at 2 a.m. in the morning at a base, again in Iraq. This was many, many years later. He died on September 11th, 2004, and we started covering in 2008. And so I wanted to know, how did this Minnesotan die? How did this corpsman die? And the Pentagon had told the family that it was an undiagnosed heart ailment, and that was it. But something didn't seem right, and I filed a public records request with the Pentagon for the NCIS investigative file, and they denied me, and we appealed. And we finally got the file. And Daniel, do you know what it showed? It showed that when it rained at that base in Iskandariyah, Iraq, that sparks would come up from the ground. Why? Because of electrical problems, because of exposed wires that were not safe, that other Marines had been burned in those very showers where Dave Cedergren was found dead. And yet they still told his family it was an undiagnosed heart ailment. So what we did was we found Marines who were at that very base, we got the autopsy photos, and we determined with experts, with talking to the Pentagon, that it was actually not an undiagnosed heart ailment that was solely to blame, that instead he had been electrocuted in those showers, and the base commander knew there was a problem, they had not fixed it, and other people had been hurt. At the bottom line, journalism holds people accountable. We get answers. And as a result of that story, not only did we get answers for a family that had none, the military changed the way they tracked the remains of every single U.S. service member killed overseas to this day. That's accountability journalism, and that's storytelling.
That is actually fascinating, and I'm not surprised. You hear that a lot. How not only this government, but many governments, just even corporations, just hide the truth and say that. I understand why you pursued the After the War, Before the Peace, the first democratic election in 2005. But what made you pursue this particular case of that sailor dying from, according to the government, natural causes, but it was at the end electrocution?
So Dave Cedergren died, as I mentioned, September 11th, 2004, and the family was told for 4 years that it was an undiagnosed heart ailment. And in 2008, the Pentagon announced that the death of Dave Cedergren and 17 other U.S. service members were going to be reopened to see if that was really the cause. And I remember going over that night, Daniel, to Dave Cedergren's father's house, and we did an interview, me and a photographer from the news station. And it was a 1 minute and 30-second story on the 10 o'clock news in Minneapolis. And I remember driving back to the station and telling the photographer, I can't believe that 4 years later, the family still doesn't know the full truth of how their loved one died. The Pentagon denied their request to know who found the body, to talk to the people who were there at the moment that Dave Cedergren died or shortly thereafter. We united the family with the person who found their loved one's body. The Pentagon redacted it from the documents we got. They blacked it out, and we did investigative journalism. We found it anyway. And so what stuck with me, Daniel, is that I felt for this family. And if it were me, can you imagine not knowing for 4 years how your loved one died overseas? And that is what sparked my questions to the Pentagon. And of course, when they denied me access under the Freedom of Information Act, the Public Records Law, to the investigative file, then I really knew we were on to something. And that's when we pursued the appeal.
Yeah, I mean, that is, again, mind blowing, inspiring on your part, just helping this family to figure out exactly what happened to their loved one. Now, I don't know what I would have done in that position if it was being my uncle, my brother, my dad doing that. I probably would have left it at rest. Like, okay, got it. He died, fine. But I guess luckily enough, I haven't been in that position. But I probably would want answers as well. But how do you transform what it seems like facts, evidence, into a story? Because at the end of the day, if you just throw out facts, whether in written form or just through a documentary, through like video form, you need to add some elements to make it compelling, to really touch people's emotions and hearts. How do you do that?
Sure, and I would actually say that my thoughts with the Cedargren family will be on them and Dave Cedargren coming up. We're taping this podcast, just so your listeners know, in July of 2024, but in September of 2024, so basically 2 months from when we're talking, that'll be the 20th anniversary of his death. September 11th, 2024 will
Wow.
be 2 decades since he died. And you know, not a month goes by that I don't think of him, and I think of that family, and I've kept in touch with that family, and my thoughts will be with them on that day. And so I hope that all of your listeners will make sure that we remember our service members who gave their lives to defend freedom and this democracy. In answer to your question, if I just recited the facts that I told you, that sparks came up from the ground at the base, that they didn't fix the problems, that other people were burned, okay, well, that's kind of a stenographer. I'm simply repeating what I read in a report. But if I start with an interview from Dave Cedargren's father, if I introduce you to his brothers and his sister, if I show you pictures, if I tell you what kind of a man Dave Cedargren was, where he grew up, if I introduce you to the Marines that served with him, that makes an emotional connection to you as the listener, the viewer, the reader. And so storytelling is about making us feel something. It's about a narrative. It's about creating images in our minds and in our hearts that make us identify with a story, right? We want to identify with characters and people and put ourselves in their shoes. And so in telling that story, I want you to identify with that family. And as you and I just said, Daniel, can you imagine it was our loved one who died at that base, right? We would want to know the truth. And so at the very baseline, storytelling, and Stephen King knows this, right, is about creating a narrative, creating a story. I, as a journalist for 25 years, I did nonfiction, of course. Stephen King does fiction. But the bottom line is that no matter what, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, you're telling a story, and you want the reader, the listener, the viewer to identify with the people in your stories. And I've always held that very, very close.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And yes, I guess that you want to have an impact. You really want to touch people's emotions. That's the only way that makes it compelling.
Well,
But when
that's
it
what
comes,
makes you care. That's what makes you care as a listener,
true,
a viewer, or a reader. If you can identify, if you can put yourself in their shoes, right? Investigative journalism at its very best is holding people accountable and affecting change. But storytelling writ large, no matter whether it's investigative or feature or enterprise, storytelling, as you said, is about characters, it's about identifying, it's about emotion, and it's about accountability.
yeah. I mean, in fact, if I think we as a humans, we are compelled by a good story. We tend to be those who tell the best stories usually win, whether it's right or wrong. If you know how to showcase a story, if you know how to deliver a message through the power of storytelling, anybody, I mean, anybody could relate to that, even if it's as simple as I'm trying to sell a pen. rather if I create a story around the pen, then a lot of people might buy it. Or but in general, in your case, which is once again factual, that many people wouldn't even care about, well, I'm having my own problems, I have lost family members, why would I care about some other family? But if you create a story, if you really touch and make people relate to it and feel, you know what, that could have been me, as you said, then it is powerful. And but when you're interviewing those people, how do you make how help them open themselves up? Because I know that sometimes some wounds are very, very painful and some people don't want to talk about it. How do you slowly get through it and create a safe space for them to open up to you?
Such a great question, and it's at the very core of what journalists do every day. We try to create sources, we try to build their trust in us. And I've worked to build trust with some sources that took years before they would trust me. And with families who have lost loved ones, whether it's Gold Star families in the military or whether it is somebody whose loved one died in a car crash, they are grieving. And Daniel, you never know when you make that phone call or you knock on that front door whether they're going to tell you, I don't want to talk, or they already have the photos of their loved one laid out on the dining room table for you to get pictures of. That has happened often to me. And so, with the Cedergren family, I promised them that I would do the very best job that I could and that I would try to get to the bottom of their loved one's death. And that's exactly what I did. They had hired 3 attorneys, and the attorneys couldn't get them the answers that we got for them, that journalism got for them. And so you've got to establish a rapport with the person whose story you want to tell, right? They are trusting you with some very intimate details. And in a way, they're giving you of themselves. They're giving you part of their loved one, right? They're giving you part of their loved one's memory. And so it's very important to honor that. And I always thank them for trusting me when I was interviewing people and gaining their trust. And then what I would do before the story airs is I would tell them when it was going to air, and I would fact check with them. Now, was your son 24, 25? Was it an A or an E in their last name? Just so that you make sure that they feel that you have done every single thing that you can to be accurate and fair and complete to them. But building sources and building trust, that takes a long time. Long time, and the best journalists can do it really, really well.
You seem to be very, very passionate about what you do, which is very inspiring, and it makes you feel like, you know what, people out there care. How do you end up in your line of work?
Sure. So I was a journalist for 25 years before stepping away in 2023. You can see I have the gray hairs to prove it. And so I needed a little bit of a break. And so now I do media training and crisis communications. We are training election officials, for example, on how to combat disinformation and misinformation. I'm training people at household brands that you would know every day that are probably in your house about how to deal with the media and how to tell stories. What got me into journalism all those years ago is that I was incredibly curious about the world around me. I used my allowance when I was 11 years old to buy the Sunday subscription of the LA Times and have it delivered to our doorstep. I started watching local news when I was 11. In high school, I helped create the Video Production Club, and we did a newscast once every quarter. And I can remember back in the 1992 election between George H.W. Bush, who was running for re-election, Bill Clinton, and Ross Perot, I was sitting in front of the TV as the election returns came in, and I was adding up manually on a piece of paper the electoral votes that each candidate was getting. And I would run and I would tell my mom, oh my gosh, George H.W. Bush got these many electoral votes. Now he's ahead of Clinton by 5. And Clinton, right? I wanted to be the first to tell people about the news and about those stories that were impacting their lives. And I've never lost that curiosity. And the amazing part of journalism as a career is that I went to Iraq twice. I reported for CBS News from Peru and Taiwan and Australia. I've reported from the White House more times than I can count. I've reported from the Supreme Court, from the halls of Congress. I've met so many incredible people. My feet have dangled off the top of the oldest lighthouse in America. I mean, just these amazing experiences that the only reason I had was because I was entrusted to represent the public in journalism, right? Journalists are not seeking answers for themselves. They're not even seeking answers for their publication or their newsroom. They're seeking answers on behalf of you, on behalf of the public. Democracy doesn't work without an independent press. It just doesn't. Thomas Jefferson said if he had to choose between having a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, he'd choose the latter, the newspapers without a government. That's how strongly he felt in the importance of a free press. So one of the things that irritates me the most is when people say fake news, right? Or they accuse us of bias. This is not fake news. Journalism is indispensable to a free society. Look at the countries around the world that do not have a free society. None of them have an independent media. None of them. And so for all the faults that journalism has, and we have some, just like every other industry, what we deliver, stories, facts, information, context, all that is indispensable to our daily lives because we are trying to provide citizens with the information that they need to make informed decisions. So if you stop consuming the news and you stop believing the truth, then goodness gracious, we are in trouble as a country. And so I would just hope that all of your listeners, if you support democracy, if you support a free society, subscribe to your local media today.
Yeah, Mark, I understand. Well, first of all, that was a great story how you became a journalist. It seemed like from a very young age you were very much into the news, into getting to know more, and the power of curiosity. It is extremely underappreciated and undervalued. It can take you. I mean, it will take you to really places, and you've been almost every single part of the world. But as the devil's advocate, I can understand why people either say fake news or bias. I get it, right? And it's just I don't consume much of the news just because I don't have the time to do so. But it is, I guess, it is hard for people when it seems like 80 or 90% of the news have a negative tone. And I get it. It just negativity sells more, keep people engaged. Like, okay, I need to worry about this. I need to worry about that. How can people consume news in a way that is like, well, I understand that it could be a bias because I can see the same piece of news from one angle and the other one, and you have two different channels or two different companies pointed at a different point, and you have two different stories. How can people trust more the traditional media nowadays? It seems like now everyone's trusting social media, which is very weird. But at the same time, it's like, well, you have flaws on both of them.
Okay, that's a great question. Let's talk about it. First of all, there's a saying that facts don't care about your feelings. We report the facts as journalists, and I'm talking about my former career because I've stepped away, but journalists report the facts. Now, whether one person feels that those are positive or negative, facts are neither. They're just the facts. And so I would actually argue that a lot of media today is not traditional journalism. We have all kinds of different platforms of media. You know, a Taylor Swift podcast is media, right? A talk show is media. An opinion show is media, right? There's a lot of different pieces of media. I'm talking about the slice that reports the news. And so lumping the news in with other things that you don't agree with is just confusing media literacy. And I think that media literacy in this country has unfortunately gone really, really down. People don't understand how journalism works. They don't understand journalism ethics. They don't understand the difference between, for example, A1 in a newspaper and A12, which could be the editorial page. They don't understand about a news broadcast on a cable news outlet at 5 p.m. versus the opinion hours that can begin at 6 p.m. So there are a lot of caveats here and nuances that I think people overlook. They don't give journalists the benefit of the doubt. Instead, they're lumping journalists in with all other kinds of media and entertainment. Journalism is not entertainment. And I would say that it's not, I've never been told that I have to slant a story a certain way or make it more negative to get more clicks or to get higher ratings or to sell newspapers. Whether something is negative or positive is really not my concern. My concern is telling you the story, getting you the facts, holding people accountable, and doing the most ethical and accurate job we possibly can. For example, if 10,000 school buses today make it to school on time and safely, that's not a story, because we expect that to happen. If one school bus crashes and many children are hurt, that's a story. Not because it's negative and we want to get more viewers and clicks, but because it is so out of the ordinary. Because school buses are so safe. That's why we report it, because if it's out of the ordinary, it's likely news. That's the way journalism works. And so I would simply say that for people who are disillusioned with journalism, maybe you're consuming the wrong sources. Maybe you're not consuming the right types of journalism that will get you the information you need to be an informed citizen. And so, Daniel, I would really hope after this podcast you find time to find a news source that will at least give you the basics so that you are an informed citizen.
Yeah, so I appreciate that answer. In fact, it's just you sort of gave me a different perspective when it comes to sure. It's like, well, if that is something of an event is unexpected, then we need to report it, like the bus crashing or you. But sadly, they tend to be quote unquote negative news, even though, as you said, it's like they're facts, neither good or bad. It's what happened. Now, on it, there we unexpect bad things, we expect good things. So I understand why it seems outside looking in that most news are negative, but just reporting facts. And that separation between opinion and facts is what a lot of people it gets that line gets blurred. It gets very blurry. It's like, okay, I don't know what's news, what's actually factual, and what's actually an opinion. And when it comes to me consuming news, the only place I guess I get my news from, sort of understand what's happening in the world, could be, I guess, Twitter, well, now X. But I don't watch TV, so I guess that would be the only place. Now, how accurate that is, I don't know. I usually take it from with a grain of salt, only because many times I don't know if it's a fact or, as you said, an opinion.
Okay, Daniel, you are based where?
In Austin, Texas.
So you've got the Austin Statesman, an award-winning newspaper. You've got the Texas Tribune, which is digital only online. They're a new digital platform. They've been around a couple of years. They cover all of Texas, award-winning as well. You've got a local National Public Radio affiliate that does local Texas news on your radio. You've got 4 super strong TV newsrooms. And I would bet that you probably have some weekly or monthly newspapers as well. You have a lot of sources in Austin where that you can get news and information that's based on ethics, factual, accurate, and provides you context to give you a wider understanding of the world. So I'm very confident that you can find some news sources in Austin.
I know. By the way, I'm 100% sure. It comes from availability is always there. You just need to go and look for it. And you're right. And you're right. To me, it feels like I should do a better job at just keeping updated with what's happening over there. I mean, out there. But it just, I guess, coming from, and this is originally from Venezuela, coming from a place where news clearly were just bullshit. Really, it's just you stop trusting media. Now, I've been living in this country for 11 years now, but that story of media doesn't report the actual facts and all that, you almost kind of, it's always in the back of your mind, and you don't give it a shot. So I would admit that I would have given it like a proper shot to at least the local news, not because I feel that they're biased, just because to me it felt like, well, what's the point of even watching it, read it, or listening to? So you're
Well,
right there.
well, I appreciate you having an open mind, and
Okay.
I will say this.
Yeah.
In 2016, on behalf of the U.S. State Department, I went to Pakistan, and I created a 2-week journalism course to teach journalists in Pakistan the right way to do journalism and how the West does journalism. Almost every year since 2017, I've gone to Vietnam, and I have taught at the country's #1 television network on fact-checking, on news production, on storytelling, on all kinds of elements of how we do journalism in the U.S. So around the world, whether it's a communist, socialist, or new forming democracy, they look to the United States of America for the gold standard of journalism. and how to report the news. And maybe we take it for granted in this country that other countries around the world are looking to us for the example of how to cover world events and provide it accurately and with context. So I would hope that we don't lose sight of the fact that we're very lucky in this country, thanks to the founding fathers and the First Amendment, that we have such great protections for journalism. That is the envy of the world, and having taught overseas in some of these countries and taught journalism, I know how precious it is.
Yeah, I would agree with your point. Not only with journalism, but with many other things that this country has to offer. Yeah, in this country, like many countries, are very very flawed. We all know that, but people that have been here for a long time, immigrants, and even a lot of Americans, again, once you get used to the new normal, you take a lot of things for granted. So I would definitely agree with that. When it comes to either news, economy, safety, crime, all of it, we take a lot of things for granted. But when you're talking now about go out there and teaching other countries, whether it's in Vietnam or any of these other places, how to be a better journalist, but also how to communicate better. That's right. We tend to have poor communication skills. Say nobody really taught us how to communicate well and in effective way. What mistakes do you see people making in terms of, in this case, body language, voice, intonation when communicating in general?
Such a great point, and we work on this in the media training that I do. And I'm going to give you your listeners some tips here and your viewers. And so when we are talking to somebody, it's really important that we make eye contact. When we don't make eye contact, it makes us look less trustworthy, maybe a little shifty, maybe that we're bored, that we're not interested to be there. So I'm looking right into the camera right now. And so whenever I do something virtually, I do look into the camera. Sometimes when we do something with our phones, we're looking at ourselves right on that picture. But it's more important you look in the camera, because that is in essence the same as looking somebody in the eye. With body language, we want to avoid crossing our arms like this. Even if we don't feel defensive, it can give off that image of being defensive. Same sometimes with crossing our legs. It can be very, very casual unless you are very comfortable with the person. And a lot of us have a tick when we speak. Well, right, and we're trying to delay and think of an answer. And so listen to yourself, record yourself, play it back, and see how often do you use those filler words. Well, if somebody asks you a question, are you stalling by saying, well, that's an interesting question, right? Because you're trying to think of time for an answer. So I think those are some very simple tips to help with body language. With voice and intonation, do you notice that when we're speaking, very naturally, our voice goes up and our voice goes down, right? A lot of people go down at the end of a sentence. And so it's important that we're not speaking in a monotone when we're doing an interview or we're doing something that might make us nervous. Instead, we want to make sure that our voice is telling that story, just like if you were reading it on a page and your mind is creating that voice and that intonation in your head. And so it's important that we make sure that our voice is fluctuating, make sure that we are going up and we're going down, and we're pausing, we're enunciating, and we're giving emphasis to certain words that we speak in our sentence. And in fact, Daniel, I have a tip sheet I send out. I'd be happy to send it to your listeners. It's called 6 Tips to Become a Better Public Speaker. And all you need to do to get it is text the word media, to 33777. That's 33777. Text the word media, and I'd be happy to send you that tip sheet.
Those are great insights, Mark. In fact, I think more people should do. One of the pieces of advice you gave was record yourself and watch you. Now, I'm I'm lucky enough that since I'm the one who edits my own podcast, I see a lot of mistakes I've made, whether I talk too fast or maybe I have the filler words like and all of that. So every episode I try to change a few things here and there. Now, I will admit it is hard to watch. It is cringy. A lot of people feel like, oh, I don't like this, and I think that's one of the main reasons why people don't improve or even are not aware of how the communication goes, because of that lack of self feedback to some extent.
Well, Daniel, if you're going to edit, can you make me look like Ryan Gosling or Tom Cruise or something? That'd be fantastic, please.
Well, I'm not at that level of editing yet, but I'll do my best for sure. And yeah, I mean, by the way, I'm sending that message because public speaking, by the way, is something that I'm very interested about. It's something that possibly I'll do in the future. But when it comes to public speaking or speaking in general, because once again, you're a great communicator, you have talked to many people in different settings, whether in front of an audience, in front of a camera, in front of just one single person. When it comes to volume, right? One tip I heard many years ago is be as big as the room. So if you're talking to one person, you just lower your voice a bit. Or if you're talking to like 100 people stage, it's a certain volume. If you talk about 20,000, different. But how about when you talk in front of the camera? What would be the volume, whether you are once again in traditional media, TV, or even on a podcast? What would be the ideal volume? Like if we were talking with for how many people should you keep when you are, let's say, recording?
Well, it's very deceptive because when we're talking into a camera lens, we don't know whether we're talking to one person or 400 or 4 million, right? And so I always imagined when I was at CBS News and I was going live on the CBS Evening News to 7 million people, I always just pictured one person, my mom. I pictured her in the lens, and how would I tell this story to my mom? You know, if I was talking to her in person, I'm not going to shout at my mom. And so the microphones are typically so good these days that we don't have to yell to our camera or to an audience. Now, of course, when you're in a room, you want to fill that room with your energy and your presence. I just spoke to 300 people yesterday, as a matter of fact. And you're walking around the room and you're trying to get audience engagement and you're raising your voice and you're lowering your voice, right? And the other thing that can be super effective is if you tell people, this is the most important thing you're going to find out today. And then you pause, and then you lower your voice, and you deliver the punchline. That gets them to really pay attention. You're leading up to it, you're pushing it, you've got the energy, and then you stop. You pause. And they're hanging on your every second of silence, and then you say the punchline softly. And you've got them in the palm of your hand. So that can be a very effective trick or stylistic choice when you're speaking to a big room.
Yeah. See, I would imagine that, and the reason why I wanted to ask you about the camera thing is because sometimes I wonder how can I create the effect that I'm talking like in a stage 300, 3,000 people, but in front of a camera. Since I cannot move around. Well, I could if I have a different setting, but when it comes to talking like to you or even just recording myself is how the level of energy I want to give in order for the person on the other side is be as engaged as possible because as you know, especially nowadays, people's attention spans have shortened quite a lot. If you don't get their attention within 5 seconds, you lose them. How do you keep people engaged, especially through a screen?
Well, remember, a camera is 2D, right? The camera that I'm talking to you on right now is 2D. So I look very flat. You look flat, right? That's just the nature of these virtual things and when you're on a camera, which means you need to bring extra energy. And I hope if you've watched this podcast so far, you can see that I'm bringing a level of energy to try to communicate during this interview. And it's really important that you bring energy, that you bring enthusiasm, because some of that is just going to get lost in the technology and the flatness and the 2D. And so whenever I'm doing something in front of a camera, not in a live audience, but in front of a camera, I want to make sure that I'm more energetic than perhaps I normally would be. And I'm projecting my voice and I'm trying to convey a sense of energy and enthusiasm and passion so that it will come through a 2D camera.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that makes a ton of sense. And yes, I feel that I'm lacking a couple of those things when it comes to energy. I'm getting better at it. But I think that in general, people who want to become a better communicators or influence people in general, which is the point we're touching right now, they should practice that. When you talk to an audience, in this case that you did yesterday, 300 people, right? How could, and based on your experience, how could somebody with a great idea amplify their message and truly influence an audience?
So I'm really glad that you asked this, and I wanted to actually invite your listeners and your viewers and you to a entire media training and storytelling camp that I'm going to be doing. I'm hosting it September 12th to the 14th in DC. It's for you to improve your public speaking, improve your storytelling, learn how to amplify your message in the media, and how to talk on camera. And so it's really important that when you have expertise, when you have a story, that you think about how can I amplify that in the audiences that would be most interested. In other words, if I want to talk about something regarding brain surgery, I'm not probably going to a plumbing conference, right? That's not my audience. And so first, you need to identify your expertise. What is your expertise? Daniel, yours might be podcast hosting, mine might be journalism, right? And everybody has a different expertise. It could be that you're a realtor. It could be that you're a financial advisor or you're a brain surgeon. Maybe you're an expert gardener. Journalists every single day need experts. And guess what? Experts every single day need journalists to amplify their expertise and amplify their message. Let's bring the two together. Every single morning in every newsroom in America, a journalist has been assigned a story and they're looking for experts. And they've got a couple of hours maximum to find those experts. So if you have a specific knowledge about something, and let's be honest, most of us do, then you need to make sure that you are crafting a story pitch and getting that pitch to the right journalist at the right publication or newsroom when they're looking for that story. This is called source development and building relationships, just like you asked me in the very beginning of this podcast, but on the opposite, 180 degrees difference. Now you're the expert trying to build a relationship with a journalist. For example, there was a massive settlement with the National Association of Realtors earlier this year in the United States. It's going to change the way we all buy and sell homes. So if I'm a local realtor, guess what? I'm reaching out to my local TV, radio, newspaper, digital outlets, and I'm saying, here are top 3 tips for sellers that you need to know as the settlement takes effect this September. Here are top 5 tips for buyers this summer. Here are 3 things to do under the new rules, right? That's adding value to the journalists, listeners, readers, and viewers. And so most people think, Daniel, that you have to pay $50,000 a month to some fancy PR firm to send out 250 news releases. I got news for you. Journalists aren't reading news releases anymore. Instead, spend that effort to find your local reporters and send them your pitches about your expertise. This is the hardest thing for people to hear, Daniel. Don't pitch your company. Don't pitch your product. Don't pitch your brand. Instead, I want you to pitch your expertise. What value can you add to the audience? And then, of course, if a journalist interviews you, they'll mention your brand, your company, your product. But the way to get a journalist's attention is to pitch your expertise. That is how you amplify your message.
See, Mark, I can definitely see that, and how you can leverage traditional media journalists, whether it's written form or on TV, to just push your brand, your expertise, your product, and all of that. I get it. But one of my issues would be that, especially if you are on a video, right? If you're invited to a studio and you're the expert that they're interviewing, if you're not a good or great communicator, basically it's almost kind of pointless. People are just gonna turn it off, change the channel in this case. If I'm somebody who wants to pitch my idea or wants to pitch my business and I'm an expert or something, I want to pitch my brand, who Daniel is. If I don't know how to communicate myself in a way that I sell myself, but in a way that people see me for who I am, then am I wasting my time? And if so, what are those things that people can do to improve their pitching or the way they deliver a message?
Okay, Daniel, so just so your listeners and viewers know, we did not rehearse what I'm about to say. You don't know what I'm about to say. This is live to tape on the spot. Daniel, I want you to tell me in 15 seconds, what is your podcast about?
Well, my podcast about it's called Redefining Wisdom. I love talking to people, learning from them. My underst- I've always known that I can learn something from someone, and that is the point. Follow my curiosity,
Okay, that was about
sort
15
of.
seconds,
Yeah.
right? That is essentially your elevator pitch. If you can come up with an elevator pitch for your podcast, I'm pretty confident that your listeners and viewers can come up with an elevator pitch for whatever the TV interview is going to be, whatever the interview they're going to do. So, my point to you, my answer to your question, my number one tip is before you do an interview with a journalist or before you go into a meeting, what is your elevator pitch? What is in the very essence of what you want to communicate, and lead with that. Start with your 15-second elevator pitch, deliver that, and then you can go on, expand, add context, etc. But everybody needs to have their 15-second elevator pitch. If you ask me what I did, as my career, I try to fit it into 15 seconds. You just try to do it into podcast. Maybe we can pump that up a little bit, Daniel. But essentially, we all need to come up with our elevator pitch. So for your listeners and viewers who may be unsure about how to do an interview, whether it's with a journalist or not, you need to do your homework before you do that interview. And think to yourself, I want you to practice in the mirror. I want you to practice in the shower. I want you to practice when you're in the car. And I want you to practice what is your elevator pitch. Get that 15 seconds under your belt. Know what that is concisely. Practice on your wife, your husband, your mom, your dog, whatever. And get that down so that you are confident when you deliver it. And that would be my top tip for getting that essence across.
I'll definitely going to practice my elevator pitch. I was not expecting that question. I'm glad you asked. Hey, and you put me in the spot and have to think about something very quickly. And yes, when I'm editing this, I'll review it and do a lot of tweaks here and
Now
there.
you
But I
now now
appreciate
now,
that.
now you better not cut it out. Listeners
I
and
know, no,
viewers, I'm telling him not to cut
serious.
that part out.
I usually I don't I rarely cut things out, and but yeah, that one stays because at the end of the day, it's definitely a learning lesson for me, and I want to look back and see that time when I talked to Mark. Hey, I made those mistakes. Now I'm much better. And that's interesting because we don't think too much about our elevator speech. Most people think about a 60-second elevator speech, which is probably too long. And if you don't get their attention, as we were talking earlier, within the first 5 to 10 seconds, you lose the person.
Right. And Daniel, have you ever been on an elevator for 60 seconds? No, unless you're going to like the top of the old Sears Tower in Chicago or, somewhere that's 100 stories. You don't get 60 seconds in an elevator with the CEO or Taylor Swift if you bump into her in an elevator. You get more like 15, and 15 is the average soundbite in television or radio. And so let's not think about 60 seconds. Let's not think about 30 seconds. I want everyone listening to this who wants to be a better storyteller, who wants to be a better pitcher of their expertise, to think in 15 seconds or less. 15 seconds. That's what I'm giving you to practice that elevator pitch.
Yeah, 15 seconds. I just wrote that down. 15 seconds and thing. But let's talk about the other side of the coin, right? We just talked about when somebody goes to a journalist or somebody's being interviewed by a journalist, right? How about on the other side of the coin? It's like you are an incredible interviewer, right? You have had high profile interviews from eh, we can talk about national leaders or even very successful entrepreneurs like Bill Gates. What makes an exceptional interviewer, and what advice would you give people in general who want to become better interviewers, whether on traditional media or podcasts?
Well, I look to some of the great interviewers. Obviously, Mike Wallace was a great interview. Leslie Stahl is a great interviewer. Barbara Walters was a great interviewer. Scott Pelley at CBS News and 60 Minutes, he's amazing. I've been so in awe of him since 1994, actually. He was based in Texas, right where you are, for CBS News. And then, of course, he became the anchor of CBS Evening News, and now he's on 60 Minutes. If you watch these interviews, some of these questions are pretty simple. Scott Pelley always likes to say he'll tell the facts about something. Well, this is happening. And then he says, I wonder, and that's the premise of his question. I wonder how you feel about that. I wonder how you react to that. I wonder how that changes your perspective. It's very short, it's very direct, but it's an open-ended question. And so when you're interviewing somebody, being a great interviewer means asking open-ended questions. Now, certainly there are times when a yes or no answer is very effective, especially when the person you're interviewing is evasive. and they are deflecting, they're pivoting, they don't want to answer a question, and you just want to get at the core, right? Yes or no? Did you make a mistake? Right? That's a direct question. And if the interviewee won't answer directly, that tells the viewer everything they need to know. Okay? But in general, open-ended questions are great. They're a journalist's friend because you never know what the person may say. Number two, you always want to be prepared. So that, for example, I did not know that you were based in Texas, but I do know some of the news outlets in Texas. So when you told me where you were based, I could, off the top of my head, mention news outlets that you could go to for really great journalism. So you always want to be prepared when you're going to an interview. And number three, and this actually might be one of the most important, which a lot of people get wrong. A lot of journalists, a lot of people get wrong when they're interviewing. You have to listen. And of course you're thinking, Mark, what does that mean? Of course I'm listening. I've got 2 ears. That's not what I'm saying. A lot of journalists, particularly those earlier in their career, they are so afraid of silence that they either write down their questions or when the interviewee is speaking, they're thinking of their next question to ask. Well, your brain can only do so many things at once. And so when you're thinking of the next question to ask, you're not 100% listening to what the person is actually saying. And sometimes the person says these amazing nuggets of revelation, and you miss it because as the person asking the questions, you're too busy thinking about your next one. So if you're going to interview someone, listen to what they're saying. It's okay if you don't know your next question by the time they finish the answer. It's okay. The world's not going to end. You're going to survive. It's all right. But you miss opportunities for follow-ups when you don't listen carefully.
I love that answer. In fact, that tip that you just gave about I wonder, or that makes me wonder, I feel that it makes the other person feel seen, understood, and heard, right? And I think once the person feels that way, that person becomes more open to just share things with you because it's like finally somebody's, as you said, as your last point, learn how to listen. If you just can't tap into that and get, but again, I think it also comes from curiosity. If you're really really curious about somebody, you can ask deeper questions rather than go, oh, what's my next question on the list? I just want to know this person like on a deeper level, which again, I love your response. And that's something that I struggle early on in general, whether it's on a podcast or with friends. Like, to have active listening is so underrated, but it's hard as well. It's really, really hard because our minds want to contribute to the conversation. We want to say a lot of things, but then you make the other person feel that you didn't even listen to them.
Absolutely. And I would just add another tip, which is being brave enough to say, I don't know. I don't understand. And so when you ask a question and your brain surgeon interviewee, right, explains something, you as the interviewer has to be brave enough to say, I don't understand what you mean. Can you explain that to me again? In journalism, they tell you, you have to say, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand. Because how can we report to the public if we don't understand how the 2x4 is going to fit into the building of the house, if that's what we're covering, right? And so journalists know that they have to be very honest. I don't understand that. Can you explain that again for me? And I think that's a great tip for people who are interviewing other people. Don't pretend that you know. Don't pretend to nod along if you don't understand, because then how can you represent that to others? How can you share that information?
Speaking of which, my, I know that this is your very first live event. What inspired you to launch not only your company, Media Advisory Experts, but to create this course, this live event for people?
Well, you started your podcast, and I would imagine part of it was an act of faith, right? And you are going to jump and you're going to do something and you're going to hope it works and you're going to give it 100% effort. And so the people that I media train, whether it's the top C-suite at a $6 billion company or it's an election official in a smaller city of 100,000 people, at the end of the day, they're all looking to communicate better. And I saw a need out there for people who want to have an immersive multi-day media training experience. How do I talk to somebody on camera? How do I do an interview? How do I pitch a journalist? How do I craft my message? How do I speak on a stage? All of these things, Daniel, that you've been asking me this entire podcast. We're covering almost all of them, but it's questions that you have, which means it's probably questions that your listeners and your viewers have. And so I saw a need, and so we're going to do the first live one. I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if it's going to be a success. I'm building it to be a success, and I want as many people to come as can. But I think it's needed. And we all have to believe in something, and we have to put our necks out there and take a leap of faith. And so this is the first of what I hope will be many of these live events. And I would invite you and I'd invite your listeners and viewers to come and join us at Media Mastery Experts Live.
Yeah, that's great, Mark, especially coming from somebody who spent so many years as a journalist, like having a job and taking that leap of faith and opening your own business that you don't know if whether it's going to work or not, but you're going to give it your all because you want to teach people what you have learned in 25 years of experience. And that's, once again, it's inspiring. It is very cool to see how, you know what, you could have probably already retired and just enjoyed your life, but it's like, you know what, I still have more to give. And I guess this company, this event, just helps people to understand media better, to communicate better, and to be more confident in front of an audience.
Daniel, if I had retired, you and I never would have met. So that's why I'm still in the game, so that I could do
Fair
your
enough.
podcast. So that's fantastic. And I would just say that, look, people need these skills, not just for talking to journalists, but when they talk to their customers, when they talk to their colleagues, when they talk to investor pitches, for example. We're giving life skills here that can really, really help a lot of people. And what I said earlier in the podcast, I almost think of myself as a matchmaker. Journalists need experts. Experts need journalists. Let's bring them together.
Awesome. And by the way, I think that even though you touch customers, investors, even as simple as your spouse, your kid, if you become a better communicator and better conversationalist, you're going to succeed in every aspect of your life, personal, business wise, all of that. So I'm all for it. I'm all for people to understand how to communicate better, and you guys are offering that, which is absolutely great. Well, Mark, by the way, I've been enjoying this conversation a lot of insightful tips and great stories. But as a closing question, right? And you have talked to thousands of people in your career. What was the best conversation you ever had, and why?
Best conversation I ever had. Oof, you're putting me on the spot. This is super tough. I've had some memorable conversations. I think of the Cedergren family that we talked about off the top. That obviously has stuck with me. I remember their names. I stay in touch with the family. I remember the date that Dave Cedergren died. So that was certainly one of the most memorable conversations. I've had other conversations that were much more light. Reba McEntire, for country fans. I've interviewed her. I've interviewed a lot of people. Certainly memorable interviewing U.S. service members as I'm standing on the top of a U.S. nuclear submarine in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, or interviewing them when we're in an MRAP, armored vehicle, driving 8 hours through the Iraqi desert. And a lot of the people every day who, they don't have to talk to me. They don't have to talk to me, and they may never see me again. But for that moment in time, when they invite me into their living room, they invite me to call them, when they invite me at their workplace, they're sharing a little bit of their story with me. And I just am so grateful for all of those thousands of people who talk to me over 25 years in journalism. Because as I would always say, we have no stories without you. We don't have stories if people aren't willing to share those stories. Journalists are not the enemy. Journalists are your neighbors. They're your loved ones. They're your colleagues. They're your coworkers. They're your church volunteers. Journalists are in your community every day. We're trying to tell your stories so that you can be better informed. And I'm just so grateful, everyone who trusted me in telling their stories over my quarter century in journalism.
Love it. Mark Albert, everyone. Mark, that was a great time that we just talked, great interview, great conversation. I know that you have mentioned your media training, uh, live event, and all that, but where can people find you if they want to keep up with what you're doing, whether it's in socials, website, all of that?
So most of my socials are M Albert News, M Albert News, and our website, our company website, where you can see our events, you can get tips, you can watch webinars, you can book a consultation with us. If you want some storytelling, public speaking, media help, it's mediaadvisoryexperts.com. Mediaadvisoryexperts.com. If you don't have a pen, it's okay. Text the word media to 33777 and I'll send you all the details.
Great. And for whoever's listening or watching this, I'll add those to the show notes, to the YouTube description, and also add it on the screen so you guys don't have to figure out how to spell. Once again, Mark, it was a total pleasure and great honor to have this conversation with you.
Daniel, the honor was all mine. Thank you so much for the opportunity.